The first rule they gave me was simple. If you hear whispers, don't look back. They didn't explain it. They didn't write it down. They just said it the same way you'd mention checking your fuel before a long drive, like something routine, something obvious. At the time, it didn't feel important. It should have. I took the assignment because it was supposed to be quiet. Night patrol in a remote national park, long stretches of empty road, routine checks, nothing complicated. After my last job, that sounded like exactly what I needed. No crowds, no pressure, just hours of driving and silence. The station sat miles off the main road, tucked behind a wall of trees, thick enough to block out most of the daylight. During the afternoon, it looked normal. A gravel lot, a low building with wide windows, a few trucks parked in a row beside a maintenance garage. Nothing about it stood out. That changed after sunset. The first night I worked, I noticed the silence before anything else. Not the kind of quiet you get when a place empties out, but something deeper, something that felt controlled. By the time my shift started, the park didn't just feel empty. It felt like everything inside it had decided to stop making noise. I had worked remote areas before. I knew what it was supposed to sound like. Even in the middle of nowhere, there's always something. Wind through leaves, distant movement, insects, animals shifting in the dark. Here, there was almost nothing, just the wind, and even that didn't feel consistent. The ranger who handed me my keys didn't say much. He walked me through the truck, pointed out the routes, showed me where the emergency gear was stored. His voice stayed even, like he had done the same explanation too many times to care about adding anything extra. When I asked about wildlife activity, he paused for a second. "Less at night," he said. The answer didn't match the place. Still, I didn't question it. I assumed he meant normal patterns. Animals staying deeper in the forest, avoiding the roads. It wasn't worth pushing. Before I left, he added one more thing. "If you hear anything," he said, "just keep moving." He didn't explain that either. I didn't ask. My first patrol started just after midnight. The road stretched out in front of me, cutting through miles of trees that swallowed the headlights before they could reach anything beyond a narrow line. Every few minutes I passed a sign or a trail entrance, but there were no people, and no movement, nothing to suggest the park was still active. I drove for nearly an hour without seeing anything. That's when I pulled over at one of the overlooks. The engine shut off, and the silence came back immediately. It felt heavier outside the truck. I stepped out and stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. The air was colder than I expected, dry enough that every breath felt sharp in my chest. I scanned the tree line out of habit, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. That's when the feeling started. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was awareness. The kind you get when someone is standing behind you, just out of sight. The kind that makes you want to turn around without thinking about it. I almost did. The thought came and went in less than a second, but it was strong enough to notice. There hadn't been a sound, no movement, nothing to justify it. Still, the instinct was there. I stayed facing forward. After a few seconds, the feeling passed. I told myself it was nothing. First night, unfamiliar place, different environment. That kind of reaction happens sometimes. Your brain fills in gaps when it doesn't recognize a pattern. That explanation made sense. It just didn't feel right. I got back into the truck and continued the route. Everything looked the same as before. The road, the trees, the empty stretches of darkness between each checkpoint. Nothing had changed. But something about the silence felt different now. Not empty. Not quiet. Just waiting. Like it had noticed me standing there and decided not to do anything. Yet. The first few nights followed the same routine. Clock in just before midnight. Check the truck. Confirm the route. Drive. On paper, everything stayed normal. That's what made the changes harder to notice at first. Nothing obvious ever happened. No sudden events, no clear signs that something was wrong. It was smaller than that, subtle enough to ignore if you weren't paying attention. I started noticing it with the radio. At random points during my patrol, it would crackle to life without warning. Not unusual on its own. Signal interference happens out there. But this wasn't the kind that fades in and out naturally. It came in sharp bursts, then disappeared completely, leaving the line perfectly clear again. The timing felt off. One night, it clicked on just as I passed a trail marker I didn't recognize. The static came through louder than usual, filling the cab with a harsh, uneven hiss. I reached for it immediately. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3, I said. "You trying to reach me?" No response. The static lingered for a second longer, then cut out completely. Silence. I waited, expecting a delayed reply. Nothing came. I glanced at the radio, then back at the road. That's when I realized something else. The trail marker I had just passed looked familiar, not in a general way, specifically. I had seen it earlier in the shift. Same position, same angle, even the same chipped corner along the edge of the sign. I slowed the truck slightly, checking the road behind me through the mirror. Dark, empty. No turns, no intersections, no reason I should have doubled back. I kept driving. A few minutes passed. Then I saw it again. Same sign, same details, placed exactly where it shouldn't have been. This time, I didn't slow down. I just kept moving, watching the road ahead, trying to match what I was seeing with what I knew should be there. According to the route, I was moving forward. The map confirmed it. The distance between checkpoints lined up, but the environment didn't. The silence pressed in a little tighter, like the space outside the truck had narrowed without changing physically. Even the sound of the engine felt muted, like something in the air was absorbing it. I reached for the radio again. "Dispatch, confirm my position," I said. A pause. Then the response came through, clear and normal. "You're still en route. Continue forward." The answer didn't match what I was seeing. I didn't argue. I just acknowledged and set the radio back in place. If I was still en route, then the road should eventually change. So I kept driving. The trees stayed the same. The road stayed straight. The sign appeared again. Third time. That's when it stopped feeling like a coincidence. I focused on the details, trying to catch something different. Something that would confirm I wasn't seeing the same thing repeated. There was nothing. Same height, same damage, same placement, like the road was looping without turning. The thought didn't make sense. Still, it stayed there. I checked the time. It had been longer than it should have taken to reach the next checkpoint. Not by much, but enough to notice. The silence deepened again, settling into something heavier. Not just the absence of sound, but something that felt intentional. Like whatever usually filled the space had been removed, or was choosing not to be there. Then the radio clicked again. This time, there was no static. Just a brief, soft sound. Not clear enough to identify, but structured, like something trying to form words. It lasted less than a second before cutting out. I didn't speak. I didn't reach for the radio. I just listened. Nothing followed. The silence returned, settling in like it had never been interrupted. A few seconds later, the road finally changed. A slight bend, barely noticeable, but enough to break the pattern. The next marker was different. New number, different shape, positioned at a new angle. Everything snapped back into place. The tension eased just slightly. I kept driving, watching for any sign that the pattern would repeat. It didn't. The rest of the route unfolded normally. Each checkpoint appeared where it should. Each turn matched the map. By the time I circled back toward the station, everything felt grounded again. But the earlier stretch stayed with me. It hadn't been a wrong turn. It hadn't been a mistake. Something about that part of the park had changed while I was in it. And whatever caused it hadn't needed sound to do it. As I pulled into the lot and shut off the engine, the silence returned one more time. This time, it felt different, not empty, not just waiting, focused, like it had been paying attention the entire time, and now it knew exactly where I was. The warning didn't come during a patrol. It didn't happen out in the park, surrounded by trees and silence, where something like that would have made sense. It came inside the station, under bright lights, in a place that should have felt normal. That's what made it stick. We were in the break room a few minutes before the shift started. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, the kind of low electrical hum you stop noticing after a while. Most of the day staff had already left, and the night crew hadn't fully settled in yet. It was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as outside. Not heavy, not watching, just still. The ranger across from me had been working nights longer than anyone else there. I had seen him around, but we hadn't talked much. He didn't seem like the type to go out of his way to explain things. He set his coffee down and looked at me like he was about to say something routine. "If you hear whispers out there," he said, "don't turn around." That was it. No build-up, no context. Just a rule, delivered like it didn't need explaining. For a second, I thought he was joking. The tone didn't match, but the words didn't make sense any other way. There was nothing in the job description, nothing in the training, nothing in the environment so far that suggested something like that would even be possible. "What kind of whispers?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up his cup again, taking a slow sip like he was deciding whether the question was worth responding to. "Doesn't matter," he said finally. "Just don't look." The way he said it didn't feel dismissive. It felt finished, like the conversation had already reached its limit before I even asked anything. I leaned back slightly, watching him. "You're serious?" I said. He met my eyes for a moment, then nodded. "You'll hear them eventually." There was no hesitation in the way he said it, no uncertainty, just a quiet certainty that made it hard to push back against. That was the part that stayed with me, not the rule itself, the assumption behind it. Like it wasn't a possibility. It was something already scheduled. I tried once more. "Has it happened before?" I asked. This time, the reaction was different. He didn't look at me right away. His eyes shifted slightly toward the door, then back again, like he was checking something without making it obvious. "Someone last year," he said. That was new. "What happened?" I asked. He shook his head once. "Doesn't matter." Same answer, same final tone. But this time, there was something else behind it. Not fear, Not exactly. Just refusal. Like whatever the explanation was, it wasn't something he was willing to put into words. The room went quiet again after that. No one else added anything. No one corrected him. No one laughed it off. The others moved around like they hadn't heard the conversation at all. But the silence felt different now, more controlled. Like everyone had already agreed not to engage with it. I didn't bring it up again. There wasn't a point. Whatever the rule meant, I wasn't going to get an explanation for it here. A few minutes later, I grabbed my keys and headed out toward the truck. The air outside felt colder than it had earlier, sharper against my skin as I crossed the lot. The trees beyond the station stood in complete darkness, the headlights from the vehicles barely reaching the edge before fading out completely. I paused for a second, looking out at them. The rule replayed in my head. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. It didn't fit, not with anything I had seen so far. Still, the way he said it made it hard to ignore. It didn't sound like advice. It sounded like something learned, but something repeated enough times that no one questioned it anymore. I got into the truck and started the engine. The radio stayed quiet. The controls lit up the same way they always did. Everything looked normal. But as I pulled out of the station and onto the road, the silence outside felt different again. Not just empty, not just focused, prepared, like it already knew I had been told and was waiting to see what I would do with it. They never wrote the rules down. There was no handbook, no official document, nothing you could point to and say this is part of the job. But everyone followed them. Not loosely, not occasionally, consistently. Like they had been tested enough times that no one needed proof anymore. That's what made it different. It wasn't policy. It was survival. A few nights after the warning in the break room, I was assigned a longer route than usual. One of the other rangers had called out, which meant covering sections of the park I hadn't fully worked through yet. Deeper areas, less familiar ground. Before I left, the same ranger stopped me near the garage. "You remember what I told you?" he asked. I nodded. About the whispers. He studied me for a second, like he was checking whether I understood more than I had said. "It's not just advice," he said. "It's a rule." The word landed differently this time. Rule, not suggestion, not warning, something fixed. "Rule 1, he added. That phrasing stayed with me. It implied structure, order, like there were others behind it, even if no one had said them out loud yet. "What happens if you break it?" I asked. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he looked past me toward the tree line beyond the lot. The darkness there didn't move, didn't shift, but it felt like it was holding something back. "People who turn around don't stay out here long," he said. The sentence was simple, too simple. It didn't explain anything, but it didn't need to. The way he said it made it feel complete. I waited for more. There wasn't any. "If you hear it," he continued, "you keep moving. Don't slow down. Don't stop. And don't turn around. Doesn't matter what it sounds like." That last part felt deliberate. "What does it sound like?" I asked. He shook his head slightly. "Different every time." That didn't help. If anything, it made it worse. Something that changes is harder to predict, harder to prepare for. It means the rule isn't based on a specific situation. It's based on a pattern, or something that learns. I didn't say anything else. If there wasn't a point, he had already told me everything he was going to. I got into the truck and started my route just after midnight. The road stretched out ahead the same way it always did. Dark, narrow, surrounded by trees that blocked out most of the sky. The headlights carved a path forward, leaving everything else untouched. For the first hour, nothing happened. The checkpoints lined up. The road stayed consistent. The silence pressed in, but it felt familiar now, something I had already started to adjust to. Still, the rule stayed in the back of my mind. Not constantly, just enough to be there. At one of the farther checkpoints, I pulled over and shut off the engine. The silence returned immediately, heavier without the sound of the truck to break it. I stepped out and closed the door behind me. The air felt colder than before, or sharper against my skin. I stood there for a moment, letting my eyes adjust, scanning the tree line the way I always did. Nothing moved. I started walking toward the trail marker, keeping my pace steady, my focus forward. Halfway there, something changed. Not a sound. Not exactly. More like a shift in the space behind me. Subtle, easy to miss. But enough. My body reacted instantly. The instinct to turn around hit before I could think about it. Automatic, immediate. The kind of response built into you after years of training. If something changes behind you, you check it. That's basic awareness. That's how you stay safe. The movement started, then stopped. The rule cut through it. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. I froze. There hadn't been a whisper. Not clearly. But whatever I felt behind me didn't need sound to trigger the reaction. That was the problem. The rule wasn't just about what you hear. It was about the instinct that follows it. I stayed facing forward. The feeling lingered for a few seconds, just long enough to make the silence feel tighter, more focused. Then it faded, leaving everything exactly as it had been before. I didn't move right away. I just stood there, letting the absence settle in, making sure nothing else followed. It didn't. Eventually, I finished checking the area and walked back to the truck, keeping my focus ahead, refusing to let my attention drift behind me. When I got back inside and started the engine, the sound broke the silence again. But the thought didn't leave. That hadn't been the whisper. Not yet. But it had been enough. Enough to trigger the instinct. Enough to test the rule. As I pulled back onto the road and continued the route, one realization settled in quietly. The danger wasn't just hearing something behind you. It was how natural it felt to respond to it. And if something could trigger that response without even making a sound, then the rule wasn't there to guide you. It was there to stop you from doing the one thing your mind would always try to do. By the time I started that shift, the rule wasn't just something I remembered. It was something I expected to use. That changed the way I moved through the park. Not dramatically, not in a way anyone else would notice, but enough that I was paying attention differently. Not just to what was in front of me, but to the space around it. The gaps, the silence, the moments where something felt slightly off. That night's route took me deeper than usual. Past the sections I had already gotten used to, into areas I had only seen once or twice during the day. The road narrowed as it stretched forward, the trees pulling closer on both sides until the headlights felt like they were cutting through a tunnel instead of open space. At first, everything held steady. The engine hummed at a consistent pace. The tires moved cleanly over gravel. The checkpoints appeared where they were supposed to. If anything, it felt easier than the previous nights. That didn't last. About an hour in, something shifted. Not suddenly, gradually. The kind of change you don't notice until it's already happening. I passed a trail marker on the right side of the road, a standard sign with a faded number and a slight bend at the corner. Nothing unusual about it. A few minutes later, I saw it again. Same position, same angle, same bend. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, watching the road ahead, letting the thought settle without reacting to it. It could have been a similar marker. The park had dozens of them. That explanation made sense, until I saw it again. Third time. Same detail, same damage, same placement. That's when it stopped being coincidence. I checked the road behind me through the mirror. Dark, empty, no turns, no intersections, no sign that I had looped back. The road ahead didn't change either. It stayed straight, uninterrupted, stretching forward into the same narrow line of darkness, but the environment didn't progress. It repeated. The silence pressed in tighter, like the space outside the truck had compressed without moving. Even the sound of the engine felt slightly dulled, like something in the air was absorbing it before it could travel. I glanced at the map on the passenger seat. Everything matched. Position, distance, route. According to the map, I was moving forward, but the road didn't feel like it. I kept driving. The sign appeared again, fourth time. This time, I paid attention to something else, the timing. Each time I passed it, the gap between appearances was slightly shorter. Not enough to notice immediately, but enough to feel wrong once you focused on it, like the road was tightening or repeating faster. The thought didn't make sense. Still, it stayed. I reached for the radio. "Dispatch, confirm my position," I said. A brief pause. Then the response came through, clear and steady. "You're still en route. Continue forward." Same answer as before, same tone, like nothing had changed. I didn't argue. I just set the radio back in place and kept driving. If I was still en route, then eventually the road would have to break the pattern. It didn't. The sign appeared again, fifth time. At that point, I stopped trying to explain it. Instead, I focused on one thing: forward. I kept my eyes fixed on the road ahead, ignoring everything else. The trees, the markers, the edges of the headlights, none of it mattered. Just the direction, just movement. The silence deepened again, settling into something heavier. Not just quiet, but intentional, like whatever filled the space out there had stepped back, or was waiting. Then, without warning, the road shifted. A slight curve to the left, barely noticeable, but enough. The next marker was different. New number, different angle, no damage. Everything snapped back into place. The repetition stopped, just like that. I didn't slow down. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, letting the normal pattern reestablish itself. The rest of the route unfolded the way it should have. Checkpoints appeared on time. Distances lined up. Nothing repeated. But the earlier stretch stayed with me. It hadn't been a wrong turn. It hadn't been a mistake. Something about that section of the park had changed while I was in it. Or maybe it hadn't changed. Maybe I had just moved into a part of it that didn't follow the same rules. As I turned back toward the station, the silence settled in again. This time, it didn't feel empty. It felt aware, not watching, not moving, just present. Like it had let me pass through something and decided not to stop me. Not yet. The first time I heard it clearly, my body reacted before my mind did. It happened near the end of a shift, in a section of the park I had already driven through more than once. The kind of place that should have felt familiar by then. The road was narrow, the trees close, the usual stretch of silence pressing in from both sides. Nothing about it stood out. That's what made it worse. I pulled over at the final checkpoint and shut off the engine. The sound dropped instantly, leaving that same heavy quiet behind. I sat there for a second longer than usual, listening, letting the stillness settle in before stepping out. The air felt colder than it should have. Dry, sharp. I stepped out of the truck and closed the door quietly behind me. The beam from my flashlight cut forward across the ground, and catching the edge of the trail marker and the uneven dirt leading into the trees. Everything looked normal. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then it changed. Not with a sound, with a feeling. The space behind me tightened, like something had moved closer without making a noise. It wasn't something I could see or hear, but it was there in the same way you feel someone standing just out of sight. My shoulders stiffened. A cold sensation ran across the back of my neck, sharp enough that I felt my breath catch for a second. Then I heard it. A whisper. Faint. So quiet it barely disturbed the silence. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. It didn't repeat right away. The quiet closed in again, filling the space where the sound had been. I stayed still, listening, trying to isolate it from everything else. Then it came again, longer this time, just enough to form the shape of speech. Not words I could understand, but something structured, deliberate, like someone speaking from a distance that didn't quite exist. My grip tightened around the flashlight. The sound came from behind me, not clearly, but enough. The instinct hit immediately. Turn around. That's what you do. That's what you're trained to do. You don't ignore sound behind you, especially not out here. You check it. You confirm it. You respond. The motion started, then stopped. The rule cut through it. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. I froze. The urge didn't fade. It got stronger. Every part of me pushed against the stillness, trying to complete the movement. It felt wrong not to react, like ignoring it would leave something unresolved. The whisper came again, closer. This time, the shape of the voice felt familiar, not identifiable, but close enough to trigger recognition. That made it worse. The cold at the back of my neck spread slightly, settling into my shoulders. My breathing slowed without me meaning to, each inhale controlled, measured, like my body was trying to stay quiet on its own. The voice shifted. A single word almost formed. Not clear enough to repeat, but intentional, directed, at me. That's when it stopped feeling like random sound. Whatever was behind me knew I was there. The realization settled in slowly, heavy enough that it pushed against the rule for a second. If it knows I'm here, then what is it? The question made the urge spike again. Just a quick look, just enough to confirm. That thought didn't feel reckless. It felt reasonable. That's what made it dangerous. The rule didn't leave room for that, not even for a second. I stayed facing forward. The silence stretched between each whisper, but it didn't ease the tension. It built it. Each pause felt like something gathering, like whatever was behind me was adjusting, finding a better way to reach me. Then the voice came again, closer than before. Close enough that it didn't feel like it was coming from a distance anymore. It felt like it was standing directly behind me. My chest tightened. Every instinct pushed against the rule now, harder than before. My body shifted slightly before I caught it, the motion starting without permission. I stopped it. Barely. Seconds passed. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. No fade, no retreat, just gone. The silence returned all at once, heavier than before. like it had been holding something in place and had just released it. I didn't move, not immediately. I stayed exactly where I was, letting the absence settle, making sure it wasn't coming back. It didn't. Eventually, I forced myself to finish checking the trail, keeping my movements controlled, deliberate. Every step forward felt heavier, like I was choosing not to acknowledge something I knew was there. When I got back into the truck, I shut the door harder than I meant to. The engine started, breaking the silence, but the feeling didn't leave. As I drove away, one thought stayed with me. The rule wasn't there to protect me from something I could see. It was there to stop me from reacting to something I couldn't. And the worst part was, it almost worked. After the first whisper, everything changed. Not outside. Inside. Before that night, the rule had felt like something I could follow if I needed to. A precaution. A response to a specific situation. After that night, it became something else. Expectation. I didn't wonder if I would hear it again. I waited for it. It didn't take long. A few nights later, I was on a route I already knew well. Same road, same checkpoints, same stretch of forest that had started to feel predictable. If anything, it should have been easier. That didn't matter. I pulled over at one of the stops and shut off the engine. The silence came back immediately, heavier without the sound of the truck. I stayed inside for a moment, watching the tree line through the windshield. Nothing moved. Still, I felt it. That same awareness. Closer than before. I stepped out. The air felt colder again, sharper against my skin. I closed the door quietly and stood beside the truck, letting my eyes adjust, my attention fixed forward. Then it started. No build-up, no hesitation. "Hey!" The word came clearly from behind me. Not faint, not distant, close. My body reacted instantly. The instinct to turn around surged up without warning, stronger than anything I had felt before. It wasn't just a reflex now. It felt like something reaching for that response, pulling it into motion. I locked myself in place. The rule hit at the same time. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. The voice came again, closer. You can hear me, right? The tone was calm, natural, the kind of voice you don't question. That was the problem. I said nothing. My focus stayed forward, fixed on the trail marker ahead of me. My grip tightened slightly, the only sign that anything had changed. And the voice adjusted. "You always stop here." The sentence landed differently. It wasn't a guess. It was observation. My chest tightened. That wasn't something it should know. The realization settled in slowly. It had been watching, not just now, before. The voice came again, softer this time. "You remember the first night?" That did it. The phrasing wasn't random. It lined up too well. The overlook, the silence, the moment I almost turned around. Something about the way it said it made the memory feel immediate, like it wasn't recalling it. It was referencing it directly. My body shifted slightly before I caught it. The urge to turn around came back stronger, pushing harder against the rule. This wasn't just instinct anymore. It was recognition. The voice continued. "You stood there for a while." A pause, listening. Each word carried more weight, more precision. It wasn't trying to sound familiar anymore. It was being specific. "You almost turned around." The sentence landed quietly, accurately. That's when it clicked. It wasn't guessing. It knew. The pressure increased immediately after. Not physically, mentally, like the gap between me and whatever was behind me had closed without needing to move. You want to know what it was? The words came softer now, not pushing, not forcing, just offering. That made it worse. Before, the whispers had tried to trigger a reaction. Now, it was guiding a thought, my thought. The urge to turn around didn't feel like a response anymore. It felt like a decision. That was the line. I stayed still. The silence stretched for a second. Then the voice changed. Not the tone, the source. It shifted just enough to match something I recognized more clearly. Not a general familiarity. Specific. A voice I had heard before. You're making this harder than it needs to be. The words carried a slight pause between them, a pattern I knew. I didn't need to turn around to recognize it. That made it worse. The accuracy wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to trigger something real. That's what it was doing, not copying, adapting, refining. Each time it spoke, it got closer. The urge surged again, stronger than before. Just a quick look, just enough to confirm. The thought felt reasonable. That's what made it dangerous. I held my position. The rule wasn't about the voice. It was about the response. The voice lingered for a moment longer, like it was waiting. Then it spoke again, quieter, right behind me. Turn around. Not a suggestion, not a command, just a statement, like it already knew what I was going to do. I didn't move. Seconds passed. The silence pressed in, heavy and complete. Then, just like before, it stopped. No fade, no retreat. Just gone. The absence felt sharper than the sound had been. I stood there a few seconds longer, making sure it wasn't coming back. It didn't. When I finally moved, I kept my focus forward, every step controlled, deliberate. I didn't let my attention drift behind me, not even for a second. As I got back into the truck and started the engine, one realization settled in fully. The whispers weren't random. They weren't just sounds in the dark. They were learning. And the more they learned, the harder it was going to be not to listen. After that night, I stopped thinking of it as something personal. Up until then, it had felt like the whispers were reacting to me, following me, adjusting to me. But the more I paid attention, the more I realized something else. It wasn't just happening to me. It was happening to all of them. They just didn't talk about it, not directly. You could see it in small things if you looked closely enough. The way some of the night rangers moved through the station. The way their attention stayed fixed forward a little longer than necessary. The way they avoided turning too quickly, even when someone called their name from behind. It wasn't obvious, but it was there. I started noticing it more after my shifts, when everyone came back in and the routine slowed down. That was when the pattern showed up. Not in what they said, but in what they didn't. The gaps. The silence between conversations. The subjects no one touched. The whispers were one of those. I tested it carefully. One night, I stayed in the garage after finishing my patrol. Another ranger was there, checking equipment, running through the same routine he always did. He had been working nights longer than most, quiet but observant. If anyone was going to say something, it would be him. "You ever hear them?" I asked. He didn't look up right away, just kept working. "Yeah," he said. No hesitation, no confusion, just confirmation. "How many times?" I asked. He paused for a second, then shrugged slightly. "Enough." Same answer I had heard before, same limit. I stepped closer, lowering my voice without thinking about it. "What happens if you turn around?" That got his attention. He stopped what he was doing and looked at me. For a moment, he didn't say anything. And then he shook his head once. "You don't," he said. "That's not an answer." "It is," he replied. The tone didn't change, but something behind it did. Not fear, certainty, like the question itself didn't make sense anymore. I held his gaze for a second longer, waiting for more. There wasn't any. He went back to what he was doing, like the conversation had already ended. That should have been it. But later that night, I saw something I wasn't supposed to. I was inside the station, finishing a report, when one of the side doors opened. Another ranger stepped in, slower than usual, like he was focusing on each movement more than necessary. I recognized him. He had been working a route deeper into the park, same direction as the missing one. He set his gear down on the table, but not the way you normally would. It wasn't dropped or placed casually. It was set down carefully, like he was making sure everything stayed exactly where it was. His radio, his flashlight, his keys, all aligned, too precise. I watched him for a second. Something about the way he moved felt controlled, not calm, controlled, like he was actively managing every action. He sat down across from me without saying anything. For a few seconds, the room stayed quiet. Then he spoke. "You heard them yet?" The question came out flat, not curious, not surprised, like he already knew the answer. I nodded. "Yeah." He studied me for a moment. "You turn around?" he asked. "No." He leaned back slightly, exhaling in a way that felt heavier than it should have. "Good," he said. The word didn't sound casual. It sounded necessary. I hesitated for a second, then asked the same question again. "You ever see someone who did?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted slightly, not toward me, but past me, behind me. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. Then he looked forward again. "Not directly," he said. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means you don't see it happen," he replied. "You see what's left." Same phrase, same pattern. But this time, there was something else behind it. Experience. "What's left?" I asked. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, his hand moved slightly across the table, adjusting something that didn't need adjusting. "Depends," he said. That was it. No details, no explanation. But the way he said it made something settle in my chest. He wasn't avoiding the answer. He was limiting it, on purpose. I didn't push further. I didn't need to. I had already seen enough. It's the controlled movements, the precise placement of his gear, the way his attention had drifted behind me for just a second longer than it should have. Something had changed in him, not visibly, not completely, but enough to notice. As I finished my report and stood up to leave, I caught one last detail. His reflection in the window, still, facing forward, not moving, even when he wasn't looking at it. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. I just walked out and headed back toward the garage. The silence followed me again, settling in the same way it always did. But now it felt different, not just present, not just aware, shared. Whatever was happening in the park wasn't isolated. It wasn't random. It was a system. And the rule wasn't there to protect one person. It was there because enough people had already made the same mistake. And whatever was left after that was still part of it. The night the radio failed, I knew it wasn't an accident. It started like every other shift. Same routine, same route, same silence settling in as soon as I left the station and the trees closed in around the road. Nothing felt different at first. If anything, it felt easier, controlled, predictable. That should have been a warning. I was halfway through a long stretch when the radio clicked. Not crackled. clicked. A sharp, deliberate sound, like something had turned it on. I glanced at it, my hand already moving toward the controls. Then the static hit. Loud, continuous. Not the usual broken interference that fades in and out. This was steady, fixed in place, filling the cab with a low, distorted hiss that didn't change no matter how I adjusted the volume. I picked it up. "It's dispatch. This is Unit 3, I said. "You getting this?" No response. Just static. I switched channels. Same noise. I lowered the volume. The static dropped, but something else didn't. A second layer of sound stayed underneath it. Faint. Structured. I froze. That wasn't interference. It repeated, not randomly, in a pattern, like speech trying to form inside the noise. I didn't say anything. I just listened. The sound shifted slightly, the static thinning just enough to let something else come through. It wasn't clear, not yet, but it carried rhythm, intent. Then the radio spoke. Not clearly, not fully, just one word. "Stop." The sound cut through the static sharply, clean, uninterrupted. I tightened my grip on the wheel. "Dispatch," I said, quieter this time. No response. The static surged again, but the voice stayed, not coming through the radio, using it. The realization settled in slowly. I turned the volume all the way down. The static disappeared. The voice didn't. It stayed exactly where it was. Same distance, same clarity. That's when I knew it wasn't tied to the signal. The radio wasn't the source. It was just a channel. I pulled the truck to the side of the road. The headlights stretched forward into the trees, illuminating the same narrow path they always did. Nothing moved outside. Nothing changed. But inside the truck, the presence felt closer. "Don't go any further," the voice came again, calm, direct, like it was giving instructions. I kept my eyes on the road. The rule surfaced immediately. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. This wasn't behind me, but it felt the same. Same pressure, same pull. The voice adjusted. "You're not supposed to be here." That didn't make sense. I had followed the route exactly, checked every point, stayed within the assigned path. Nothing about my position was wrong, but the certainty in the voice made it feel like it was, like I had crossed something without realizing it. I glanced at the GPS. The screen flickered once, then froze. The coordinates stopped updating. The map stayed locked in place. That was new. I tapped it once. Nothing changed. The voice continued. "You went too far." The phrasing shifted slightly, like it was refining the message. Not just a warning, a correction. My chest tightened. This wasn't random. It was responding, adjusting to what I was doing. I reached for the radio and turned it off. The static cut instantly. The voice didn't. It lingered for a second longer, unchanged. Then it moved. Not physically, but in presence, closer. "You can fix it." The words came softer now, almost reassuring. That made it worse. Before, the whispers had tried to pull a reaction. Now, it was guiding one. "Turn around." There it was, same pattern, different method. My hands tightened on the wheel. The urge to react hit immediately, not to look, to act, to follow the instruction. That was new. The rule didn't just apply to looking anymore. It applied to responding. I didn't move. The silence stretched for a second. Then the voice layered, faint echoes of itself overlapping, slightly out of sync. "Turn around. You can fix it. Just turn around." Multiple tones, same message. The pressure built, not sharp, steady, like something pushing from all sides at once. My focus narrowed. Forward, just forward. The headlights, the road, nothing else. Seconds passed. Then, without warning, the GPS flickered again. The coordinates jumped forward. The map updated. The system reset itself. At the same moment, the voice stopped. Completely. No fade, no transition, just gone. The silence returned all at once. Heavier than before. I didn't wait. I shifted the truck back into gear and kept driving. The road ahead didn't change. The trees didn't move. Everything looked exactly the way it should. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside the pattern. The radio hadn't failed. It had been used. The GPS hadn't broken. It had been held. Something had paused the system, inserted itself, and then let it continue. As I drove back toward the station, one realization settled in clearly. The whispers didn't need the environment. They didn't need the forest. They didn't need the silence. They could use anything. And now that I knew that, there was nowhere left that felt separate from it. After the radio incident, it stopped feeling like something I could manage. Up until then, there had always been distance. The whispers came. I followed the rule, and eventually they stopped. There was a pattern to it, something I could rely on. That pattern didn't hold anymore. The next time it happened, it didn't wait. I had just stepped out of the truck at a routine checkpoint, one I had visited multiple times before. Same trail marker, same stretch of road, nothing unfamiliar. The silence settled in immediately. Heavier than usual, closer. I didn't even have time to adjust. "Hey!" The voice came instantly. No buildup, no warning, right behind me. I froze. The reaction hit harder than before, sharp and immediate. My body shifted before I could stop it, the motion starting on instinct alone. Turn around. That was the first thought. Not a question, not hesitation, a command. I locked in place. The rule cut through it, but this time it felt weaker, like something was pushing against it from the other side. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. The voice didn't pause. You dropped something. Same phrase, same tone, but closer, more certain. I didn't look. There, behind you. The second sentence followed immediately, adding direction. Precision. That was new. Before, it had suggested. Now, it was guiding. My weight shifted slightly, my body trying to complete the movement on its own. It felt automatic, like I had already decided to turn and was just catching up to the action. I forced myself still. There was nothing on the ground in front of me, nothing missing. But the way it said it made it feel real. That was the problem. It didn't need to be true. It just needed to feel true. The voice adjusted again. I think it's important. The tone changed just enough to create urgency. Not panic, not fear, just pressure. Subtle, controlled. My breathing slowed, each inhale sharper than the last. The cold from the air settled deeper into my chest, making every movement feel heavier. The urge to turn didn't fade. It built. You're not even going to check? The question came with a slight shift in tone. Not confusion, expectation. Like the response had already been predicted. My head moved slightly before I caught it. Just a fraction. Enough to feel how easy it would be to complete the motion. I stopped it, barely. The silence between each sentence stretched longer now, but it didn't reduce the pressure. It amplified it. Each pause felt like something gathering, building momentum before pushing again. Then the voice changed. Not gradually, completely. The familiarity sharpened, locked into something specific. You remember that night? The words hit immediately. The overlook, the first shift, the moment I almost turned around. The memory wasn't random, it was targeted. You stood there for a long time, a pause, thinking about it. My chest tightened. It wasn't guessing. It knew. That realization hit harder than anything before. The pressure surged instantly, not just instinct, recognition. The urge to turn around spiked, stronger than it had ever been. It didn't feel like a reaction anymore. It felt like something being completed. You almost did it. The voice came softer now, closer. You still can. That was the breaking point. My body moved, not fully, but enough. My shoulders shifted, my head starting to turn before I could stop it. The motion was smooth, natural, like it had already been decided before I realized it. I caught it halfway, everything locked at once. Muscles tensed, breathing stopped. The movement froze mid-action. That was the closest I had come, close enough to feel it. Whatever was behind me didn't move, didn't need to. It was already there. The silence pressed in, heavier than it had ever been. Then the voice dropped, flattened, lost all familiarity. You're making a mistake. No emotion, no variation, just statement. The pressure shifted again, not pulling, pushing. Turn around, not a suggestion, not guidance, a command. The force behind it felt physical this time, and sharp enough that my body reacted again before I could stop it. The motion started, stronger than before, pushing through resistance like it had found the exact point to apply pressure. I held, every part of me resisted. The rule wasn't just something I remembered anymore. It was the only thing stopping me. Seconds stretched, longer than they should have. Then it stopped, instantly. No fade, no retreat, just gone. The silence returned, heavier than before, settling into the space the voice had filled. I didn't move, not immediately. I stayed exactly where I was, locked in place, making sure it wasn't coming back. It didn't. Slowly, I finished checking the area, every movement controlled, deliberate. I didn't let my attention drift behind me, not even for a second. When I got back into the truck, my hands weren't steady. The engine started, breaking the silence, but the feeling stayed. As I drove away, one realization settled in clearly. This wasn't just about hearing something in the dark. This was pressure, focused, precise, designed to break one rule. And the worst part wasn't how strong it had been. It was how close I had come. Because if it kept getting better at this, I wasn't sure how long I could keep stopping myself. No one ever sees it happen. That's the first thing you understand. There are no witnesses, no reports that describe the moment itself. No one comes back with a clear explanation of what they saw or what they experienced. You only find what's left. The call came in just after midnight. Routine. One of the rangers hadn't checked in after reaching a scheduled point along a secondary trail. It wasn't uncommon for delays to happen out there. Routes ran long, signals dropped, people lost track of time. Still, protocol required someone to follow up. That someone was me. Dispatch gave me the last known location, a stretch of road deeper into the park, one I had only driven a few times before. Narrow, isolated, the kind of place where the silence settled in faster. I acknowledged and started driving. The entire way there, something felt off, not louder, not heavier, just certain, like something had already happened and the park had adjusted around it. I reached the location in less than 20 minutes. The truck was exactly where it should have been, parked on the side of the road, engine off, lights dark. Nothing unusual at first glance. I pulled in behind it and shut off my engine. The The silence came back immediately, and I stayed inside the truck for a moment, listening. Nothing. No movement. No sound. No sign that anyone was still there. I stepped out. The air felt colder than usual, sharper against my skin. My breath slowed without me meaning to, each inhale controlled, deliberate. The driver's door was open. That was the first thing that didn't fit. No one leaves a door open out here. Not at night. Not with the way the silence carries. I moved closer, shining my flashlight inside. The interior light was off. The seat was empty. The keys were still in the ignition. The radio was on, and it was whispering, faint, barely audible. But there, I froze. The sound wasn't coming through clearly, but it carried the same structure I had heard before. The same pattern, the same deliberate rhythm, directed. The rule surfaced immediately. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. This wasn't behind me, but it was still there, still speaking. I didn't respond. I stepped back and turned my attention toward the trail. That's where I saw the footprints. One set, clear, leading away from the truck. No sign of struggle, no uneven spacing, just steady steps moving forward into the trees. I followed. The trail narrowed as it moved deeper into the forest. The beam of my flashlight tracked the prints, keeping my focus ahead, refusing to let my attention drift anywhere else. The silence closed in tighter the farther I went. The whispers from the truck faded behind me. But the feeling didn't. Something was still there, just closer now. The footprints continued in a straight line. Then the pattern changed. Not dramatically, just enough. The spacing shifted slightly, like the person had slowed down, hesitated. The steps became uneven for a few feet. Then they stopped, completely. No turn, no break in direction, just ended. I stepped closer, scanning the ground carefully. That's when I saw it. Not a footprint, something else. A disturbance in the dirt, circular, uneven, like something had pressed into the ground without leaving a defined shape. It sat just beyond the last step, and there was nothing after it. No continuation, no second set of prints, no sign that the person had moved in any direction, just empty ground. The silence tightened around me. I didn't need to hear anything to understand. The pattern fit, the open door, the single trail, the abrupt stop. He had heard it, stopped, turned. That was the moment, the one no one sees. I didn't stay. I marked the location, reported it in, and stepped back onto the trail, keeping my focus locked forward. I didn't let myself think about what might be behind me, not even for a second. As I moved back toward the road, one detail stayed with me. The whisper from the truck, still going, still speaking, like it hadn't finished. When I reached the road, the truck was exactly where I had left it. Door open, keys in place, radio on, still whispering. I didn't get closer than I had to. I shut the door, reached in, turned the radio off. The sound cut instantly. The silence returned, heavier than before. As I got back into my truck and started the engine, one realization settled in fully. The rule wasn't about avoiding something dangerous. It was about avoiding a moment, a single decision. Because whatever happens when you turn around doesn't need time. It just needs that one response. And once it happens, there's nothing left to explain. After that night, the distance disappeared completely. Before, the whispers had always stayed just out of reach. Close enough to hear, close enough to feel, but never close enough to make it undeniable. There had always been a gap, something separating me from whatever was behind it. That gap was gone. The next shift started the same way every other one did. Same routine, same route, same quiet exchange at the station before heading out. No one mentioned what happened. No one asked. That was normal. But the silence outside wasn't. It felt tighter the moment I stepped out of the truck at my first checkpoint. Not heavier, not louder, closer. Like the space around me had narrowed without anything physically moving. I stood there for a second, letting my eyes adjust, keeping my focus forward. Then it started. Hey, no buildup, no distance, right behind me. I didn't move. The reaction hit instantly, stronger than before. My body shifted slightly before I stopped it, the motion starting without permission. The rule surfaced immediately. Don't turn around. The voice didn't pause. You don't have to ignore me. Calm, controlled. Like it was continuing a conversation we had already been having. That was new. Before, it had tried to get my attention. Now it assumed it already had it. I stepped forward, moving along the trail without looking back. The voice followed. Not louder, closer. You know I'm here. The words landed differently. Not as sound, as presence. I could feel it now. Not physically, not in a way I could point to. But in the same way, you feel someone standing too close behind you. A pressure, subtle but constant, occupying space just outside your awareness. I kept moving. The trail marker ahead stayed in focus. Everything else didn't matter. The voice shifted, layered. At first it was faint, multiple tones overlapping slightly, just out of sync. Then it aligned, sharpening into something more controlled, more precise. You're making this harder. You don't need to do that. It's okay. The phrases came one after another, steady, deliberate, each one carrying a slightly different tone, not chaotic, not random, coordinated. That was new. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was many, working together. My breathing slowed, each inhale measured, controlled. The cold air felt sharper now, cutting deeper into my chest. The pressure increased, not pushing, closing in. Then one voice separated from the rest, clearer, stronger, accurate. Why are you doing this? The tone shifted slightly. Confusion, but controlled. It matched something I recognized. Not almost, not close. Exact. My chest tightened. That wasn't imitation anymore. That was precision. The others fell back slightly, still present, still layered, but quieter now. Background noise. This one took focus. You know me. The words came softer, closer. The urge to turn surged again, stronger than before. Not just instinct, recognition. The difference mattered. Before, I resisted because I knew I shouldn't react. Now, I resisted because I knew exactly what I would see if I did, and that made it worse. I kept my focus forward. The rule didn't change, no matter what it sounded like, no matter how real it felt. The voice continued. You don't have to keep pretending. The tone shifted again. Not confusion, not familiarity, confidence. It wasn't trying anymore. It knew it was getting closer. The layered voices returned, building behind it, overlapping slightly, repeating fragments of the same phrases. You know me. It's okay. Just look. The repetition wasn't random. It was reinforcing, narrowing. The pressure built steadily, not sharp, not overwhelming, but constant, like something tightening around a single point, applying force without needing to increase it. My focus narrowed. Forward, just forward. The trail, the ground, nothing else. Then the voice came again, right behind me, closer than before, clear. You're almost there. The words didn't sound like a warning. They sounded like a conclusion. The presence held for a second longer. And then it shifted. Not away, back, just enough to create space again. The silence returned, but it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like something had moved closer than it was supposed to, and then chosen not to go any further. Yet, I finished the patrol without stopping, without reacting, without turning, but the feeling didn't leave. It stayed with me the entire time, just behind the edge of my awareness, not pushing, not forcing, just there. As I drove back toward the station, one realization settled in clearly. The whispers weren't trying to reach me anymore. They already had. Now they were adjusting to how I responded, learning what worked, refining it, getting closer each time, and eventually, they wouldn't need to try at all. I started thinking about leaving after that, not seriously at first. Just the kind of thought that stays in the background, quiet, persistent, easy to ignore during the shift, harder to dismiss when everything else goes silent. It followed me home. That was new. Up until then, everything had stayed contained inside the park. The whispers, the silence, the pressure. It all ended when the shift did. Once I left, once the sun came up, it faded. Not completely, but enough to feel distant. After that night, it didn't. I noticed it the first time I tried to sleep. The room was quiet, normal quiet. No trees, no open space, no long stretches of darkness. Just walls. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The silence felt familiar in the wrong way. Not identical to the park. Close enough. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore it. My breathing stayed slow, controlled, the same way it did during patrols. I didn't move much, didn't turn. I didn't realize I was doing that until later. Then it happened, not clearly, not fully, but enough. A whisper, faint, buried under the normal sounds of the room, but structured in a way that didn't belong. I froze. For a second, I convinced myself it wasn't real. Residual noise. Memory. Something carried over from the shift. That explanation made sense. Then it came again, closer. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the park. It was here. The rule surfaced immediately. If you hear whispers, don't turn around. That didn't make sense anymore. I wasn't on patrol. There was nothing behind me except a wall. Still, I didn't move. The instinct to turn my head, to check the room, to confirm there was nothing there, it hit just as hard as it always did. Maybe harder, because this time there was no reason for it to exist. But the rule didn't depend on reason. It depended on response. I stayed still. The whisper lingered for a second longer, then faded. The silence returned, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like confirmation. I didn't sleep after that. Not properly. Every time I started to drift, the same awareness came back. The same pressure just outside my perception. Waiting. Not pushing. Not forcing. Just present. By the time my next shift started, the thought had changed. Leaving wasn't a solution. It was irrelevant. I went in and followed the same routine. Checked the truck. Confirmed the route. Kept my interactions short. No one mentioned anything. They didn't need to. I started watching them differently. Not just for what they said, for what they avoided. There were others like me. You could see it if you looked closely. The way some of them paused before turning. The way their attention stayed fixed forward a second longer than necessary. The way they reacted when something moved behind them. Subtle, controlled, learned. They had heard it outside the park. That was the difference. The ones who hadn't still treated it like a rule tied to the job. The ones who had moved differently, like they understood something the others didn't, that it wasn't tied to a place, it was tied to awareness. That night, during patrol, the whispers came again, not aggressively, not immediately, just enough. Hey, close, familiar, expected. I didn't react, I didn't turn. The voice lingered, then faded, and the silence returned. Same pattern, same control. But something about it had changed. It wasn't trying to get my attention anymore. It didn't need to. It already had it. As I drove deeper into the park, the realization settled in fully. I could leave the job, quit the station, stay away from the forest completely. It wouldn't matter, because whatever had started out there wasn't staying there. It had followed the only thing it needed, not the place, not the routine. Me. And once something like that learns you exist, it doesn't need the environment anymore. It just needs the moment you forget the rule, even once, because that's all it ever needed. It took me longer than it should have to understand it. Not because the signs weren't there, because I was looking at them the wrong way. I thought the rule was meant to protect me. That was the mistake. For weeks, I followed it exactly the way I was told. I didn't turn around. I didn't react. I didn't respond, no matter how convincing the voice sounded or how close it felt. And every time it worked, nothing happened. The whispers came, I held my position, and eventually they stopped. That pattern made it feel like I was doing something right, like I was avoiding something. But that wasn't what was happening. The first sign came when the pressure stopped increasing. After a certain point, the whispers didn't escalate anymore. They didn't push harder, didn't try new approaches as aggressively as before. The intensity leveled out, like something had reached a threshold and decided it didn't need to go further. At first, I thought that meant I had adapted, that I had learned how to handle it. I was wrong. The second sign came in the silence. Not the usual silence of the park, heavy and controlled. Something else. Gaps. Moments where the quiet felt too complete. Not empty. Missing. Like something that should have been there, wasn't. Those moments didn't last long. They would break quickly, replaced by the familiar presence, the whisper returning just enough to fill the space again. That's when it started to make sense. The whispers weren't just something that happened. They were something that maintained a connection, not through sight, not through interaction, through awareness. Hearing them was enough. That was the part I had misunderstood. The rule wasn't there to stop you from encountering something. It was there to control how you encountered it. If you turned around, something happened. Immediate. Final. I didn't know what. No one ever explained it. They didn't need to. I had seen what was left. That was one outcome. The other was what I was doing, not turning, not reacting. Just listening. That didn't end the connection. It sustained it. That was the difference. That was the realization. The rule didn't remove you from whatever this was. It kept you in it, just in a way you could survive, for now. Once I understood that, everything else started to fall into place. The way the voices changed, the way they adapted, the way they stopped pushing once they reached a certain point. They weren't trying to break everyone. They didn't need to. Some people turned around. That was enough. The rest stayed. Aware, connected, part of it. Now, when I'm out there at night, the whispers don't feel like interruptions anymore. They feel expected, like part of the environment, like something that has always been there, waiting for the right moment to be noticed. They don't rush. They don't force. They don't need to, because they already know something I didn't understand when I started, that I'm listening. And that's enough. I still follow the rule every time, no matter what it sounds like, no matter how close it feels. I don't turn around, but I don't think that means I'm safe. It just means I haven't crossed the line yet. Sometimes when the silence settles just right, I can feel it behind me. Not moving, not shifting, just there, waiting, not for a mistake, not for a reaction, just for confirmation. For the moment, I decide to see what I already know is there. And the worst part is, I don't think it matters how long I wait, because eventually, everyone reaches a point where they want to be sure. So if you ever hear it, if you ever feel something standing just behind you, don't turn around, no matter what it says, no matter how real it sounds. Because the moment you decide to check is the moment it stops needing to hide.